Organic Lock is the strongest organic binder on the market today. Designed for stabilizing aggregate surfaces, its functionality allows you to create natural, aesthetically pleasing, permeable surfaces that hold up to extreme conditions. This video will walk you through the steps on how to properly install the Organic Lock pre-blended aggregate material on your job site. Organic Lock is a patented powdered binder made from a renewable plant resource and a mixture of proprietary additives. It's designed to be blended with crushed aggregate to create natural-looking pathways and surfaces. The binder locks the aggregate in place to minimize erosion and minimize project site maintenance. As the water permeates the aggregate, it gets absorbed by the Organic Lock binder and creates a gel that coats the aggregate particles. The gel expands in size and holds the aggregate particles together, which significantly reduces erosion. When getting the pre-blended Organic Lock aggregate delivered by a licensed Organic Lock dealer, you'll need to pay attention to moisture content and optimal site preparation before the installation process can begin. Adding the optimal amount of moisture to pre-blended Organic Lock aggregate activates the powder into a gel that forms between the particles. The delivered aggregate will always have a beginning moisture content that may need to be optimized. To achieve the optimal water content, it's important to have an understanding of your starting moisture percentage. An appropriate ending moisture content will be below 8 to 10%, but this optimal state is best established with a field test. The best thing you can do is to figure out the exact water to add on the first batch, then simply replicate it for each subsequent batch. The ideal way to establish proper water content in the mixed product is with a snowball test. The snowball test is the act of picking up the blended aggregate and using both hands to firm and form a snowball. Start your first batch by adding small metered increments of water until you achieve a successful snowball. If the ball is too dry, it's going to crumble. If it's too wet, you'll see a moisture glaze or sheen, which is telling you there's too much water. What you're looking for is that spot just after it crumbles, but before the moisture creates a sheen-type texture. Another good way to test it is the step test. Simply step on the ball you've created. On the left, you can see that water sheen telling you it's too wet. The goal is the sample on the right, which maintains its form but is not slick on the surface. If you find yourself with a batch that is too wet, the best thing you can do is add further dry material into the mix to dilute the moisture and return it to a proper snowball. Now that you've got a proper aggregate homogeneously blended with the proper amount of Organic Lock and water, your product is ready for installation. The key elements for a successful installation are subgrade and base construction, surface watershed management, spreading and compaction, and finishing on the final spray for the completion of the installation. The first step of installation is to excavate and properly prepare the subgrade to be ready for the installation. Excavate the proposed area to a depth related to your installation goals, which will allow for the proper depth of base aggregate followed by the Organic Lock blended aggregate. Before adding your base aggregate, you'll need to compact the subgrade to a 95% modified Proctor density using a compactor. Once your subbase is compacted, you will install your base layer at the depth level required for your particular traffic type, as found in the related specifications. The base material type is listed in the specifications as your region's DOT recommended crushed granular road base. An example of this would be 3/4 crusher run or granular A material, with the most important aspect being the inclusion of fines in the aggregate material. In situations where the base layer calls for greater than 4 inches, you need to install the base in 3-inch lifts. Be sure to apply a fine water spray in between lifts to create cohesion while optimizing the compaction. Compaction should be done with a vibratory compactor or minimum 1-ton roller and needs to achieve the 95% Proctor density. With a successfully installed base in place, you can now install the Organic Lock blended aggregate to the depth required in your specifications related to the expected traffic type. If you're installing up to 4 inches deep, you can install in 1 lift. If you're installing greater than 4 inches, you should do this in equal lifts with a minimum of 2.5 inches and a maximum of 4 inches per lift and a light soaking in between. It's always important to understand the effects of Mother Nature surrounding a project. Things like topography, ground cover, and canopy cover can have significant impacts on water flow over your projected surface. It's important to guide the water flow where needed and avoid low areas, as sitting water on a pathway system is never ideal. Proper watershed management is best achieved by installing a crown or cross slope to divert rainfall runoff to flow off the side of the surface. An important note is to be aware of any man-made water sources that may have an effect on the area. Things like sprinkler heads that are facing your surface can have detrimental effects with long-term pooling. It's heavily advised to adjust this flow away from the product surface. The maximum slope that is acceptable for an organic log-blended aggregate application is 20%. For slopes that are 10% or greater, we recommend installing runoff diverters, which are materials such as railroad ties, metal troughs or equivalent embedded in the pathway at a 45-degree angle to prevent water gaining momentum, which can accelerate washout damage. To determine how much product you'll need for your project, you can use the product calculator on the organiclog.com website under the Resources tab. If you know your square footage and traffic type, just go to the Resources section and drop down to Product Calculator. Select your traffic and enter your square footage to establish your product quantities. In order to get the proper compacted depth, understand that the aggregate will typically compact 20 to 25%, depending on the aggregate type, gradation, and the moisture content. For smaller projects or tight spaces, it's possible to use a rake and wheelbarrow to spread the aggregate. However, extra precaution should be taken to ensure depth consistency over the entire project, as man-made installations can be prone to error. On larger projects, it's ideal to spread the material using a consistent mechanical means. Although using a paving machine is going to provide the most consistent results, this may not always be available. Where this is the case, back-dragging the blended aggregate can be done with a front-end loader or a box gannon attachment. Since the material is being pulled behind machinery, there can be compaction issues as the tires drive over the material. This is something to carefully consider and minimize where possible. Although there are multiple ways to spread the blended aggregate, for larger projects, the use of a paving machine, such as an asphalt spreader, is definitely ideal for consistency and efficiency. Using an asphalt spreader allows you to have the pre-mixed and pre-hydrated material delivered in a truck directly to the spreader. The material is dumped into the spreader, where it is then dispersed at a set height on the prepared base. The asphalt spreader provides no additional compaction on the material, while it moves along dispersing a consistent depth of product. For larger projects, you can arrange larger trucks to continually feed the spreader as it moves down the installation. Because the water is already mixed into the aggregate, it's immediately ready for compaction after spreading has occurred. However, if during spreading, the moisture levels of the aggregate drop because of ambient temperatures, examples being hot, dry days, it is advised to lightly spray the surface to increase the hydration to optimal levels before compaction. Compaction is done with a minimum 1-ton roller. This should be a static compaction, not a vibratory one, as the vibration can disassociate the bond. If during compaction you're finding significant ruts, the material is moving around like jello, or perhaps it's sticking to the roller as it moves, these are signs of too much moisture. In this case, you should simply allow time for some of the water to evaporate out of the mixture. If it doesn't have enough moisture, you'll be seeing lines and cracks consistently. To fix this, you can provide an even and light spraying of water over the areas of issue. Make 4 to 6 passes with the roller until you no longer see any lines on the surface. Pay close attention to the installation specifications to make sure you compact in lifts for any installation above 4 inches in depth. Hard-to-reach areas should be compacted using a hand tamper or equivalent. To complete the installation, you'll want to do your final soaking. The purpose for this is to make sure that any of the top layer material that wasn't properly hydrated gets a top-down soaking to make sure it's activated and can settle into the rest of the mixture. Last comes the curing time, or in better terms, the time before first use. The actual time depends on moisture content of the aggregate, climate, canopy cover, and the depth of the installed material. However, we generally say that 24 to 72 hours is the standard, but the longer is always the better. To establish timing for first use, simply walk on the material and feel if it's firm enough to allow traffic. If the material is dry on the surface but still feels a bit spongy below, then it is a good idea to leave cure another day.